First of all, I want to thank ARC for the opportunity to speak to you today. I also want to thank Matrix Technology for asking me to come, and also for CSIA for asking me to speak today. 25 years, well, I'm more around 37 plus my years with Campbell's. Multiple roles. Started off in management side of business, moved into electrical engineering, which was my major. Multiple roles from head of engineering, project management, running a maintenance department, the control side, running a boiler house. Switched over back to operations at one time in my career, and actually was manufacturing cans for Campbell Soup back when we used to make our own cans, and we were manufacturing soup cans at about 3 million a day. So a fun time back then. And then in 97, I went to the corporate world and headed up the electrical controls group there. And there I had global responsibility for all of Campbell's sites and set the standards and moved Campbell along in the controls world. So let's begin. So what's cooking? Let's talk a little bit about Campbell Soup and the companies that we have. Some people think it's just Campbell Soup. Very few people know that we own Pepperidge Farm, so all the cookies and crackers that are out there. Some new acquirements that we've had recently was Bolthouse Farms. Those are fresh juices and sauces that they make. Plum Organics, those people who have young children, this is organic food and snacks for babies. And then most recently, we bought the Kelsen Group, and you see their cookies, butter cookies, in airports a lot. So the agenda today is the madness, how to avoid pitfalls, key principles to success, and the benefits that I have witnessed over my 37 plus years. So let's start with the madness. We're all risk adverse out there. Nobody wants to go out there on a project and end it up in disaster and having a failure, especially today when projects are much bigger in scope. And in a corporate environment, they're always the big ones. But yet you still have those projects that exist in the plants where you have your smaller engineering teams out there, and they want to be successful as well. We always want the biggest bang for our buck. Okay? Don't want to spend a lot of money, but I want to get the most out of what I'm getting out there. I want to get the best controls, and I want a perfect design, and I want it to start up on time. But we want to keep our costs low. You know, sometimes in a controls world, we really don't have much to say as to what makes up that ROI. You know, we're usually the last guys in, and they're expected to be the first ones out in order for a project to run. And so, you know, when you tell them, well, I need to spend, you know, so much money for putting in a server or something like this, you know, they're all looking at you. What? But yet they're spending millions of dollars for one piece of equipment. So going along with the madness is a common law of business balance. Anybody familiar with that? Raise a hand. No? Well, someone from the 19th century, John Ruskin, came up with this quote here, which says, "It's unwise to pay too much, but it's worse to pay too little. And when you pay too much, you lose a little money, and that's all. When you pay too little, sometimes you lose everything, because the thing you brought was incapable of doing the thing you brought it to do." And we heard a little bit about that in some of the keynotes earlier this week, where they were talking about, you know, the control side of things, the automation side of things, 6-7% of the actual cost of a project. But it's so critical in what we do out there in making a project successful. So the madness is common law businesses prohibits you from paying little and getting a lot. It can't be done. So how do we avoid these pitfalls out here? Well, if I go back in my old days, we used to, as a young engineer, go out there and bring in a contractor, bring in a controls group, and be waving our arms and saying, I want you to do this, I want you to do this, and I want it all to work. In today's world, that really doesn't work very well. You need to demand a detailed proposal from each bidder. You want to make sure that you're working with apples and apples. And if you didn't have that written scope to begin with, you don't know what they're bidding on. You're not telling them what you want. You're not telling them that this is how we do things today. And we want to continue doing it that way. Sometimes you'll bring in a controls engineer and they have their way of doing things. And it's not the way you do it. And then when you get it installed, you're lost. You don't know how to work on it. Your technicians are at a loss. Don't default on the lowest bidder. Here again, it goes back to John Ruskin and what he talked about. That low bid isn't going to get you very much. At least in my experience, we've found that out. And if you don't start out with a plan for success, you're going to struggle through the whole project. There has to be a light at the end of the tunnel, and it can't be a train. And make sure you have project managers assigned. It's so critical to have a project manager who can orchestrate the whole project from one end to another, to look over the whole project, to identify where there may be some roadblocks along the way, and to maybe put additional emphasis in certain areas at certain times to make sure that the project is successful. And I found that typically a good integrator has a good delivery process. And we'll talk a little bit more as we go forward in my presentation. So, principles to success. Remember, not all integration companies are equal. I found it's always a team effort. It has to come out being a win-win. If you go into a project and you're out there to say, I'm going to win and the vendor's going to lose, how do you go back to him in the future and say, I need your help? We need to go back and look at this. At that point, they're ready to, dust off their hands and head out the door and say, you're on your own. Okay? It's not a tug of war. It's not us against them. You need to have that teamwork going out there. You need to have, and a lot of projects, may start out at a corporate level. So at that point, you need to get the local plant involved. And we heard that numerous times in a lot of the keynotes. We also heard that a lot in a lot of the sessions that I sat into this week as well. And that integrator has to be part of that team. Okay? That gets you away from having it, us against them, and we're not having that tug of war. That team effort is going to make it more successful because everybody's on the same page and everybody has the end point in mind and the success. One thing that we started doing at Campbell's over the past several years was having a local project delivery leader. And what did that person do is it was his main focus to bring people from the plant into the project at appropriate times. And he was held accountable for bringing those resources to the project. Too many times as an engineer, you go into a plant, especially from a corporate perspective, and you don't know the right people to go to get them involved to make this project successful. All right? So that's a positive thing that you really need to do. And you also need to get to a point with your integrator that he's a trusted advisor, almost like a family member to you. And that's difficult sometimes. You go to the dance and you don't know if you're going to leave with the same person you came with, and that happens sometimes. And sometimes you go out on a limb and you try to find out where that next system integrator is, and that's a plus of why you should really consider having a CSA certified member working with you. That takes part of the game, part of the struggle out of what you're looking for. Because at least the business principles are going to be in place, and now you're just working on the technology. And sort of what we heard from Bob earlier is now you have to focus. What is your experience in my business? What have you done in the past? Make sure you know what you need and what you want. And you need to do that up front. You can't be going into a project and halfway through it start throwing, oh, well, I want this or I want that. It really throws a big mess in the whole works. Having to change gears, having to back up. It's no different than anybody who's tried building a home and you try to add something at the 11th hour. The price of that goes up sky high. No different here with projects that we do. And some of you, I may be speaking to the choir, and you may have heard all of this before, but there are folks within our organizations and your organizations that aren't privy to this. They're, young fledglings starting out their careers in some of your facilities around the world and don't have this experience or this knowledge, and they're finding out the hard way. They're gonna see all those pitfalls we talked about earlier. So your internal team should have a good idea of what the project requirements are and understand the return on investment. And if not, your integrator can help you with it. And that's part of the training that they get to become a certified member within CSIA. Learning all of these techniques, and they could help you. And everybody has to agree on standards. Remember, I talked before about you need to tell, your integrator how you want things programmed. That's a pitfall out there that's always out there. And, they may want to develop their screens to their standards, and they may not be to your standards. And do you have standards? And if you don't have standards, well, then you should start developing them. And working with your integrator, they could help you out. They have that experience to bring into the fold, what they've learned along the way. So, lean on them. That's what you're paying them for. That's part of their delivery to you. We all have specialties within our own businesses and corporations, processes and technologies that we have that, we hold real close to our chest, and we really don't share that very often. And expecting an integrator to come in and know all of those things, that's not always going to be the case. Maybe someone whom you've worked with for a number of years. But sometimes, you're going to run into an opportunity where, your favorite integrator comes in with his bid, and, maybe he's slammed full with all kind of work, and he just can't come in with the price that you're looking for. Or he just doesn't have the resources to cover it. And you're going to have to find someone else to be in bed with you to go make your way through this project. And you're going to have to, train them as to how you do things and how you want things. So, don't hesitate to spend some time training them. And don't look down on them for them not knowing it, because there are specialties that we have that they don't know. Maybe the next time they do a job for you, they'll be able to do it, but first time around. However, integrators that already know your process will result in a lot of benefits, unless it's bleeding edge technology. And at that point, you're walking hand in hand through the whole thing. And you're both going to learn how to get through the project. But, as Bob mentioned before, there are certain givens that are out there. They need to know about PLCs. They need to know about DCS systems, HMI. and different MES-type solutions. I don't know about you, but I heard mixed bags all day over the past couple days in the keynotes, trying to get away from FATs. I'm a firm believer of FATs. I may shy away from some FATs, especially if it's a piece of equipment that we've bought numerous times. And if I'm buying a packing machine, it's the same one I bought a year ago, and unless I'm putting something really different in it, do I really need to go to that FAT? Do I need to send people, overseas to take a look at something like that? Control panels. A lot of panel builders today they'll actually videotape an FAT. You could actually, watch from your computer at your desk and do an FAT. But when you're talking about process controls and running whether a distillation tower or some recipe management system or fancy control scheme, I'll tell you what, you need to perform that FAT. They're very critical. Simulating through the project, it is very, very critical, and I strongly recommend that you do those FATs. You need to simulate as much as possible, and you need to bring the plant people into the situation. Most recently, we were doing an install at one of our plants, and we were doing an FAT. And for that FAT, we invited some operations folks, some maintenance people, and also some engineers. And I went along as well. And my role there was more to coach them. Too many times you go to an FAT and it might be a bunch of engineers over there and, they nod their head and they think everything's okay. It's more of a party than an FAT. And when it shows up in a plant, all of a sudden bells and whistles go off because the screens don't look the way they were supposed to. Colors are wrong, so on and so forth. So that was one of the things that I urged the people that were there from the plant. And they were regular hourly people. They're just as important. And I empowered them to say, here's your chance to say with your piece, because this is the only opportunity that you're going to have to make a change, and it's not going to affect the project. We don't want to be doing this at the 11th hour when we're trying to start up the project. We want to be doing it now while we're still in their offices and they have the manpower and it's on their schedule to do it. That's when that should be done. So it's important. You need to empower those folks to do that. I always hate when I go onto a job and I see an integrator doing programming off in a corner when we first walk in a building. That's drives me up a wall. And I'm struggling as to, I paid all this money and we sat down in our meetings and looked at our timelines and you're supposed to be done, and we show up in the plant and you're over there programming away in the corner. The FAT is going to highlight that well in advance so you don't end up in that situation. So again, I can't say it enough. We need to be doing those FATs. Size matters. We heard some of this also during some of the keynote. You don't need to hire a huge, full-fledged integration firm for some small plants. It's an overkill, and sometimes, sticker price will shy you away. So, knowing that you have a CSI certified member there, if they're familiar with your technology or they're familiar with programming, a smaller one will work just fine for you. Someone who's in your backyard and you're not having to find someone who's hundreds of miles away from you. Now a lot of us represented as part of this forum are Fortune 100, Fortune 1000, Fortune 500 companies. And we need those because some of those projects are just huge, and the amount of manpower that's needed to execute those projects, it is very important. But, they all should have going back to what we said earlier, they need to have, the good project development, management, and also the technical expertise. Those are givens. Benefits. Well, over the years, I've worked at a lot of companies. Some of them I only worked with them once. A lot of them we've become like family. Someone you can call on, someone you could bounce things off of. So, a lot of the things that CSIA brings to the table are just highlighted here in this slide here. Thank you.